The People's Republic of China was established on October 1st, 1949, as Mao became the chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Consultative Conference, the chairman of the Central People's Government of China, and the chairman of the People's Revolutionary Military Council of the Central People's Republic, the Central People's Government, which is basically communist for the dictate of China. Mao moved to Zongnanhai, a compound next to the Forbidden City in Beijing, and there he ordered the construction of an indoor swimming pool and other buildings because, equality. He conducted business either in bed or by the side of the pool, preferring not to wear formal clothes unless absolutely necessary. Mao often visited his villa in Wuhan between 1960 and 1974, and in this villa, well, there's a garden, living quarters, conference room, bomb shelter, and swimming pool. I mean, equality for everyone. I'm sure everyone else could afford these things as well. In October 1950, Mao made the decision to send the People's Volunteer Army, a special unit, which actually isn't a volunteer army, of the Chinese army into the Korean War and fight as well as to reinforce the armed forces of North Korea, which had been in full retreat. Mao directed the People's Volunteer Army campaigns to the smallest details. As the chairman of the Communist Party of China's Central Military Commission, he was also the supreme commander-in-chief of the Chinese Army in the People's Republic and chairman of the ruling Communist Party of China. The People's Volunteer Army was under the overall command of then newly installed Premier Chu Enlai and General Peng Dehuai as field commander and political commissar. During the land reform, many landlords and rich peasants were beaten to death at mass meetings organized by the Communist Party as land was taken away from them and given to poor peasants, which significantly reduced economic equality, although I'm sure Mao wasn't one of the people who was sharing his villa with everyone else. Oh, no, equality for thee, but not for me. Anyways, a campaign to suppress counter-revolutionaries involved public executions that targeted mainly former Kuomintang officials, businessmen accused of disturbing the market, former employees of Western companies, and intellectuals whose loyalty was suspect. Since there was a policy to select at least one landlord and usually several in virtually every village for public execution, between only around 2 million and 5 million were killed. Not that much. In addition, at least 1.5 million people, or perhaps as many as 4 to 6 million, were sent to reform through labor camps, where many perished. Mao played a personal role in organizing the mass repressions and established a system of execution quotas where he said that a certain amount of people needed to be killed, which were often exceeded. Great. He defended these killings as necessary for the securing of power. The Mao government is generally credited with eradicating both consumption and production of opium during the 1950s using unrestrained repression and social reform. You see, he's a good guy. 10 million addicts were forced into compulsory treatment, dealers were executed, and opium-producing regions were planted with new crops. Remaining opium production shifted south of the Chinese border into the Golden Triangle region. Starting in 1951, Mao initiated two successive movements in an effort to rid urban areas of corruption by targeting wealthy capitalists and, political opponents, known as the 3 Anti and 5 Anti campaigns. Whereas the 3 Anti campaign was a focused purge of government, industrial, and party officials, 5 Anti campaign set its sights slightly broader, targeting capitalist elements in general. Workers denounced their bosses, spouses turned on their spouses, and children informed on their parents. The victims were often humiliated at struggle sessions, a method designed to intimidate and terrify people to the maximum. Sounds like a great time to be alive. Mao insisted that minor offenders be criticized and reformed or sent to labor camps, while the worst among them should be shot. These campaigns took several 100,000 additional lives, most of them via suicide. In Shanghai, suicide by jumping from tall buildings became so common that residents avoided walking on the pavement near skyscrapers for fear that suicides might land on them. In 1954, he was succeeded as the chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference by Chu Enlai as chairman of the Central People's Government of China, by himself as the chairman of China, and as chairman of the People's Revolutionary Military Council of the Central People's Government, by himself as chairman of the National Defense Commission. Okay, I have no words for that. Following the consolidation of power, Mao launched the first 5-year plan between 1953 and 1958, which aimed to end Chinese dependence upon agriculture in order to become a world power. With the Soviet Union's assistance, new industrial plants were built and agricultural production eventually fell to a point where industry was beginning to produce enough capital that China no longer needed the Soviet Union's support. The success of the first five-year plan encouraged Mao to start the second five-year plan in 1958. Mao also launched a phase of rapid collectivization. The Communist Party of China introduced price controls as well as a Chinese character simplification aimed at increasing literacy. Large-scale industrialization projects were also undertaken. Programs pursued during this time included the 100 Flowers campaign, in which Mao indicated his supposed willingness to consider different opinions about how China should be governed. Good, at least he changed his mind. Given the freedom to express themselves, liberal and intellectual Chinese began opposing the Communist Party and questioning its leadership, and this was initially tolerated and encouraged. And in the end, everyone lived happily. No, I'm just kidding. After a few months, however, Mao's government reversed its policy and persecuted those who had criticized the party, totaling perhaps only 500,000, as well as those who were merely alleged to have been critical, in what is called the anti-rightist movement. The 100 Flowers movement led to the condemnation, silencing, and death of many citizens, also linked to Mao's anti-rightist movement, resulting in the deaths of possibly only a few million. In January 1958, Mao launched the second five-year plan, known as the Great Leap Forward, a plan intended as an alternative model for economic growth to the Soviet model focusing on heavy industry that was advocated by others in the party. And I'm sure this would work. Anyways, under this economic program, the relatively small agricultural collectives that had been formed to date were rapidly merged into far larger people's communes, and many of the peasants were ordered to work on massive infrastructure projects and on the production of iron and steel. Some private ownership of food production was banned, and livestock and farm implements were brought under collective ownership. Under the Great Leap Forward, Mao and other party leaders ordered the implementation of a variety of unproven and unscientific new agricultural techniques by the new communes, but who cares about stuff like science? The combined effect of the diversion of labor to steel production and infrastructure projects and as well as natural disasters led to an approximately 15% drop in grain production in 1959, but don't worry, it gets better because it drops another 10% in 1960, and there was no recovery in 1961. Great. In an effort to win favor with their superiors and avoid, being shot and purged, each layer in the party hierarchy exaggerated the amount of grain produced under them. Based upon the fake success, party cadres were ordered to give a disproportionately high amount of the fake harvest to the government, primarily for use in the cities and urban areas, but also to export, because what better idea than to give your food away when your own people are starving. The result, which was worsened in some areas by drought and in others by floods, was that the rural peasants were left with little food for themselves, and many millions starved to death in the Great Chinese Famine. The famine was a direct cause of, only 30 million peasants in only 3 years between 1959 and 1962. Also, many kids became malnourished during years of hardship and struggle for survival, and many died shortly after the Great Leap Forward ended in 1962. So Mao lost esteem among many of the party officials, who knows why, and he was eventually forced to abandon the policy in 1962. And he lost political power to moderate leaders such as Liu Shaoqi, who became the new chairman of China, and Deng Xiaoping. At the Lushan Conference in July and August 1959, several ministers expressed concern that the Great Leap Forward wasn't that successful. The most direct of these was Minister of Defense and Korean War veteran General Peng Dehuai. Following Peng's criticism of the Great Leap Forward, Mao ordered a purge of Peng and his supporters. How typical, ending criticism of the Great Leap policies. Senior officials who reported the truth of the famine to Mao were branded as right-wing opportunists, and a campaign against right-wing opportunism was launched and resulted in party members and ordinary peasants being sent to re-education labor camps, where many would subsequently die and be starved to death. Years later, the Communist Party would conclude that as many as 6 million people were punished in the campaign, and that's only the government statistics. Now, nobody knows for sure how many people died during the Great Leap Forward, but it was anywhere between 15 and 46 million people. On the international front, And the period was dominated by the further isolation of China. The Sino-Soviet split resulted in Nikita Khrushchev's withdrawal of all Soviet technical experts and aid from the country. Stalin had established himself as the successor of correct communist thought well before the Communist Party of China, and therefore Mao never challenged anything that Stalin or his supporters said. Upon the death of Stalin, Mao believed that the leadership of communist doctrine would fall to him. The resulting tension between Khrushchev and Mao ruined the relationship between the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of China. State Chairman Liu Shaoqi and General Secretary Deng Xiaoping favored the idea that Mao be removed from actual power as China's head of state and government, but maintain a ceremonial and symbolic role as chairman of the Communist Party of China, with the party upholding all of his positive contributions to the revolution. They attempted to marginalize Mao by taking control of the economic policy and asserting themselves politically as well. And many claim that Mao responded to Liu and Deng's movements by launching the Cultural Revolution in 1966, which, just like the Great Leap Forward, I'm sure is a great success. Now, believing that certain liberal bourgeois elements of society continue to threaten the socialist framework, groups of young people known as the Red Guard struggle against authority at all levels of society and even set up their own tribunals. Chaos reigned in much of the nation and millions were persecuted. During the Cultural Revolution, nearly all of the schools and universities in China were closed, and the young intellectuals living in cities were ordered to the countryside to be re-educated by the peasants, where they performed hard manual labor and other work. So the Cultural Revolution actually led to the destruction of most of China's culture and the imprisonment of a huge number of Chinese citizens, as well as the creation of general chaos in the country. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions died in the violence of the Cultural Revolution. The authorities allowed the Red Guards to abuse and kill everyone who opposed Mao. Now it was during this time that Mao chose Lin Piao, who seemed to echo all of Mao's ideas, to become his successor. Lin was later officially named as Mao's successor. By 1971, however, a divide between the two men became apparent, and Lin Piao died in a plane crash over Mongolia, mysteriously as he was trying to flee China. The Communist Party of China declared that Lin was planning to depose Mao. At the same time, Mao lost trust in many of the top Communist Party of China officials. Now, when Mao first tasted mangoes in 1968, he was delighted, and news of his enthusiasm made it to the Pakistani Foreign Office. On August 4th, 1968, Mao was presented with about 40 mangoes by the Pakistani Foreign Minister, Syed Sharifuddin Pirzada, in an apparent diplomatic gesture. Mao had his aides send a box of mangoes to the Mao Zedong propaganda team at Tsinghua University. One of the mangoes was sent to Beijing Textile Factory, whose revolutionary committee organized a rally in the mango's honor. Workers read out quotations from Mao and celebrated the gift. Altars were erected to prominently display the fruit. When the mango peel began to rot after a few days, the fruit was peeled and boiled in a pot of water. Workers then filed by and each was given a spoonful of mango water. The Revolutionary Committee also made a wax replica of the mango and displayed this as a centerpiece in the factory. After this, there were several months of mango fever, and more replica mangoes were created and the replicas were sent on tour around Beijing and elsewhere in China. Too bad Mao couldn't actually provide his own people with real food, though. Anyways, many revolutionary committees visited the mangoes in Beijing from outlying provinces, and approximately 500,000 people visited the replicas when they arrived in Chengdu. Badges and wall posters featuring the mangoes and Mao were produced in the millions. The fruit was shared among all institutions that had been a part of the propaganda team, and large processions were organized in support of the mangoes. One dentist in a small village compared a mango to a sweet potato, and he was put on trial and executed. Yep, this is Mao's China. In 1969, Mao declared the Cultural Revolution to be over. Although many historians mark the end of the Cultural Revolution as a whole or in part in 1976, following Mao's death and the arrest of the Gang of Four. In the last years of his life, Mao was faced with a declining health due to either Parkinson's disease or, according to his physician, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, as well as lung ailments due to smoking and heart trouble. It's so sad. Smoking may have played an important role in his decline in health, for Mao was a heavy smoker during most of his adult life. Mao's last public appearance and the last known photograph of him alive was on May 27, 1976, when he was meeting the visiting Pakistani Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto during his one-day visit to Beijing. Mao had two major heart attacks in 1976, one in March and another in July, before the third struck on September 5th, making him paralyzed. Mao Zedong died nearly 4 days later, just after midnight on September 9, 1976, at age 82. The Communist Party of China delayed the announcement of his death until 4 o'clock later that day, when a radio message broadcast across the nation announcing the news of Mao's death while appealing for party unity. So in total, Mao only killed between 40 and 70 million people, which is obviously why he's here on this list, because he killed the most people in peacetime ever.